Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. I got a question over email, the answer to which I think will be of some use to many people, so I'm going to answer it here in this video, with permission. I'm going to read to you the questions from I presume, young man by the name of Kenneth, and here's what he had to say. What you say about the burden of proof is very interesting to me, especially about engaging with the question and not just saying, you have to prove it to me. I don't have any burden of proof, so get busy proving your idea to me. I think part of why so many atheists, and I am an atheist at this time, say the burden of proof is on the one making a positive claim, that is, God exists or God doesn't exist, is because so many Christians respond to questions of how do you know God exists with, well, can you prove God doesn't exist? I'm going to continue to believe God exists until someone proves to me that he doesn't, etc. Have you heard of Matt Dillahunty? He said something about the burden of proof I find very compelling. He talked about the game of guessing how many blue marbles are in a clear glass jar. Matt said that before you even begin to try to figure out the answer, there is one thing you absolutely know, and that is the number is either an odd or even number. If someone asserts that the number is even, and I say I don't believe that, that is not the same thing as saying I think the number is odd. The default position before you find out the answer is, I don't know yet. He said a God either exists or it doesn't. For clarity, we need to keep God exists and God doesn't exist separate and examine separately. If I say you have failed to meet your burden of proof that your God exists, I'm not saying that your God doesn't exist, but that you have not established that it exists. It seems to me that if the burden of proof is on atheists to prove Yahweh does not exist, then Christians have the burden to prove that thousands of other gods do not exist. And if you set about trying to prove all those gods and goddesses don't exist, those believers will use the same defenses Christians use to defend their God claim you failed to prove their deity doesn't exist. I'm wondering what you would say I'm missing here. Alright, so first, thanks for the question. There's actually a bunch of stuff within this, so it's going to be several-parter. I will actually, by the way, point out, answering sort of the last part first, I've got a video on how you can use, it's called a logic lesson for atheists, and I forget if I put modus tollens in the title or not. I'll link it in the description in any event. But it suffices to disprove all contradictory religions to prove that Christianity is true. So it's actually very straightforward, in a relative sense, to do this as a Christian, because if you actually have some positive claim which you have proved, then everything which contradicts it, when you have a known truth value, or a truth value you are at least holding, anything that contradicts it is just trivially false. It's an incredibly simple argument to show that anything which contradicts something you have shown to be true is therefore false. So just sort of handling that. I'm not sure, by the way, which Christians it is whose response to how do you know Christianity is true is, well, how do you know that it's not? It's a strange answer to me. I mean, there are tons and tons and tons of books all establishing how Christianity, showing how you can know Christianity is true. I'm used to the that side of things where, well, where do you want to start? There are lots of books to recommend. And I've done this in the past, too, with people, depending on what sort of book you want, I'll point you to different apologetical books to, start with to get the answer of, how can you know this is true? So I'm not real familiar with someone whose defense of Christianity is, how do you know it's false? I find that kind of strange. So, start with C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, or start with, was that recent book, can't remember the author, The Case for Christ. Lee Strobel, that's it. There are lots of different ways you can start with. There are, tons of apologetical websites that will delve into the historical arguments. You could look at, if you want a much more academic version of this, it's like 600 pages long, but I have it on good authority, extremely good. N.T. Wright's the resurrection of the Son of God. Tons and tons of arguments for Christianity. There are tons of arguments for God, and so on. And I'm used to the people who will make those. And when it comes to God, any of St. Thomas's 5 ways are all quite good. I recommend, by the way, because starting with God first is a good starting point. I recommend Edward Fazer's book, 5 Proofs for God, or 5 Proofs for the Existence of God. The title slightly escapes me at the moment. Anyway, So that part sort of out of the way. Getting back to the beginning about Matt Dillahunty's, jar of marbles. Now, one of the curious things that you will note about this thought experiment is that the jar of marbles doesn't matter in the slightest. The number of marbles in this jar is completely and utterly irrelevant. And moreover, whether this number is even or odd has no consequence whatsoever. Now, this is not true of the question of whether or not God exists. It's very much not true of the question of whether or not Christianity exists. I'm going to link in the description my video about how atheism changes everything. But whether or not God exists affects literally everything in the world. So it's not a consequence-free question. Now, the funny thing is, these same atheists or anti-theists or whatever, who will tell you that religion, doesn't matter whether or not you believe in God. That's completely irrelevant. You live your life exactly the same way either way. Will also tell you that religion is poison, that religion is responsible for all the wars, that religion, makes people evil, that for a good person to do bad things, it takes religion and so on. So, here's the thing. They're wrong about the specifics, but nonetheless, if they're not trying to say that the question doesn't matter, they will tell you that the question matters quite a lot, although, all in the negative. As a general rule, be a little suspicious of anybody who blatantly contradicts themselves and doesn't even seem to notice, and both sides of that blatant contradiction are very self-serving. Anyway, so let me suggest another type of game as a thought experiment. Suppose you're an umpire in a baseball game. And suppose that a player goes and slides into the base, and the player who's at the base catches the ball and tries to tag him. And the player makes the positive claim that he is safe, and the player sliding makes the positive claim that he is safe, and the player, say we're at home plate, that he's safe. The player who catches the ball and tries to tag him makes the positive claim that he has tagged the guy out. So we have two competing positive claims, and you are the umpire. Now, if you just say, well, I don't believe either of you, the game stops right there. Because you have to continue. Suppose suppose there are already 2 outs. Either the team has gotten a home run, just gotten a run, or the other team is now at bat because the team has struck out. The team has been caught out because they've got 3 strikes in this inning. One of these 2 things has to happen. And you, the umpire, have to decide between these 2 things. And there will be no further baseball game unless you decide. So unlike the jar of marbles, which doesn't matter in the slightest, it has no consequences of any kind, whether or not these marbles, the number of marbles is odd or even. By the way, just fun fact, how do you know that one of the marbles didn't, wasn't chipped, and so there's only, 5/7 of a marble, so it's not, whatever point, I chose that badly because it's not a decimal, but, whatever in 5/7 of a marble, so it's neither odd nor even, it's in fact a, non-whole rational number, or, heck, won't get into it, it's continuous, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a digression. So, contrasting the utterly unimportant odd or evenness of the number of marbles in a jar versus here, just another game, still a game, but here you have to choose one of these 2 things. And the problem is, at this point, if you say, well, the guy who caught the ball has, the baseman hasn't proved his case that you're out, so therefore you're safe and your team has a run and you're still at bat, you haven't actually done your job as the umpire. All you've done is you've established there's a default rule in favor of, of the runner, which is not actually part of baseball. And in the same way, if you simply say, well, the guy running hasn't proved his claim that he actually was safe, and he touched the base before the ball touched him, it's a positive claim, then, therefore he's out, you've now established another, just default rule, but you haven't actually ruled on what's the case. And in any event, suppose you did those 2 things. What is the difference between saying, unless it has been proven to me that this guy, was safe. We're going to assume he's out. Unless I get further evidence, we're going to act as if he's out. I'm not going to say he's out. I'm not going to call him out. We're just going to run the baseball game as if he was out. Well, what's the difference between that and calling him out? I mean, this is sort of where there's this odd thing that a lot of online atheists like to do, where they act as if something is true, but they're not saying out loud that they think it's true. So they think there's a big difference here, as if what really matters is what you say out loud, not what you do. Words speak louder than actions. It's apparently the rule. And on the flip side, just to sort of carry it through, suppose you had that default of unless, the baseman can prove to you, to your satisfaction, his positive claim that he managed to tag the runner out before he managed to touch the base, that the runner is considered safe. Well, what's the difference between that, saying the case has not been proven, so we're going to proceed as if the guy is safe, and calling him safe? The game will proceed in exactly the same way, whether you call him safe or whether you say that in default of there being a call here, we're going to act as if I called him safe. There's no actual difference here. Now, you can easily, by the way, convert this into something which, is more significant. Because suppose you're an umpire in a Major League Baseball game, and this is, say, the bottom of the ninth. And so, and the score is such that if the guy is safe, the one team wins. If the guy is out, the other team wins, or goes to overtime. I didn't think it through. Baseball's not really my sport, but I believe that would be the case. Well, here's the thing: if you act in the one way, there'll be people who win money and people who lose money because the game ends up going towards one team rather than the other, as opposed to if you go the other way, then you go into overtime and the other team may win, at which point lots of money and other things change, and the outcome of the players' lives change. Lots of things hang on that decision, even in this sort of game. So you can see, just varying the game up a little bit from one artificially chosen to not matter in the slightest to anything, to one that is, of some actual consequence. Simply saying, I don't know, is, well, insufficient. If the umpire simply says, I don't know, you know what, let's just end the baseball game. It hasn't been proven to me either way, so, yeah. Well, I mean, that would again be another action, probably resulting in his tires being slashed and, angry fans finding him outside and, possibly giving him what you might loosely call a kinetic massage. But in any event, even that would be an action which is, granted, if the umpire simply says, I have no idea how to call this, so I'm not going to call it, so we're not having a baseball game anymore. This is, yet a third course of action, which does have those categories, but you can kind of see why this would be, terrible. This is not the umpire being, a good umpire. This is the umpire simply refusing to be an umpire. And it's possible for the umpire to simply refuse to be an umpire. When it comes to human beings and the existence of God and the questions of religion, you can't do that. Okay, you can commit suicide, but even that's a choice. But you're going to live in the world. You're going to live according to some moral system. You're going to live violating some moral systems. So, unlike the umpire, which is still an artificial example, you can't just say, game's over, I'm not playing anymore. You're still alive. I mean, you can do it. Go ahead and say, I'm not making a choice. Well, you're just standing there. And just standing there is doing something. And it's refraining from doing other things. And you are in accord with some moral systems and violating other ones. And, so yeah, unless you can somehow manage to take yourself out of time-space entirely, you can't do it. You can't suspend judgment. You have to act on the basis of something. You have to act, at the very least, in accordance with something and out of accordance with other things. And so your kind of two choices are to be an irrational brute who doesn't think about what it's doing and simply acts on the basis of instinct, refusing to consider anything, or you kind of have to actually think about what you're doing and make some sort of choice because you have to act, because you can't simply not act at all. And as I said, I know there'll be atheists who will claim, it doesn't actually matter, it's just this free-floating proposition with no implications of any kind. But, not even they believe that. I mean, just look at them. See how many of them say that it's utterly irrelevant whether or not religion exists. It's utterly irrelevant whether or not, take whatever you want, the President of the United States, senators, people on Supreme Court. It doesn't matter what religion they have. They don't care in the slightest. See how many atheists actually think that? Who don't think it matters in the slightest whether or not, people who actually have power over them are of any particular religion or none. See how many of them think it's actually completely irrelevant. And if they don't think this is completely irrelevant, it's not irrelevant to your life either. This is the thing, they're just lying to you. I mean, straight up. These people clearly and absolutely do not believe that whether or not God exists doesn't matter. So when they say things on the basis of it not mattering, that are only true if it doesn't matter whether or not God exists, they're just outright lying to you. So in conclusion, yes, I do strongly recommend that if somebody is trying to get you to commit one way or the other as to whether or not the number of marbles in a large jar with many marbles in it is odd or even, that you simply say, no, I'm not wasting my time here because this doesn't matter. I also recommend that you be able to tell the difference between real life and this sort of thought experiment in which nothing matters. Because real life actually matters. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at